Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Buenas tardes. Welcome. It is my honor to welcome Dr. Irma Velásquez Nimatuj as the 2026 Havens Wright Center for Social Justice Visiting Scholar. Dr. Velásquez Nimatuj is not new to our community. Many of us will remember that she joined us virtually in September of 2020 during the pandemic, where she presented the resistances and challenges of the contemporary Maya. It is especially meaningful to now welcome her here in person to Madison. Bienvenida. Many of you might also know that Irma was here approximately 19 years ago, when she was invited to do a lecture on International Women's Day. So Irma has been here before and has a connection to Madison and to the Midwest in general. Dr. Velásquez Nimatuj is a Maya Quiche journalist, activist, and social anthropologist whose work sits at the intersection of scholarship and struggle. Her intellectual and political commitments emerge from and remain accountable to long histories of indigenous resistance in Guatemala. Across her work, she challenges dominant epistemologies while advancing indigenous ways of knowing, being, and governing. In 2002, she played a key role in the legal efforts that helped establish racial discrimination as a crime in Guatemala. This intervention reflects her broader commitment to transforming structures of power through both institutional and community-based strategies. She is the author of foundational work on indigenous peoples, land, race, class, and gender. And for over 20 years, she wrote a weekly column in El Periódico, open to shape public discourse around inequality, democracy, and state violence. Her work extends into the global policy and advocacy spaces. She has contributed to the United Nations through the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and has worked with UNICEF and UN Women, bringing grounded community-based knowledge into international arenas that often marginalize those perspectives. In recognition of her impact, she was awarded the Lhasa Oxfam America Martin Dislin Memorial Lectureship. Her academic trajectory itself is a critical intervention. After beginning her studies in Guatemala, she became the first indigenous woman from her country to receive a Fulbright scholarship. And later, the first Maya Quiche woman to earn a PhD in social anthropology from UT Austin. She has held visiting appointments at institutions, including Brown and Stanford, while maintaining a sustained commitment to engage public-facing scholarship. Dr. Velásquez Nimatuj is also a poet. The collection Lunas y Calendarios reflects on indigenous identity, memory, and gender through Mayan cosmologies. She reminds us that knowledge production takes multiple forms and that intellectual work is also aesthetic, relational, and deeply historic. Today's talk, for the Regenerative Anthropology, Epistemic Alternatives for Indigenous Peoples, invites us to think beyond critique toward regeneration. It asks us to consider what it means to take indigenous epistemologies seriously, not as objects of study, but as frameworks that can reshape the very foundation of our disciplines and our politics. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Irma Velásquez Nimatuj.
Thank you so much, Armando, for your kind work. I appreciate it. Shakir Menan, Shakir Tat, Shakir Hali, Allah, Shakir Siswantiniblit. Hun Kiep Anuship Maltiosh. Buenas tardes para todas. Good afternoon, everyone. Providing Center for Social Justice. And I want to begin by thanking Adriana Pajek, Dr. Armando Ibarra, and my dear brother, Mario Garcia Sierra. Also, I want to say thank you to all departments and centers for the kind work in making it possible. I came here at a moment when the world looks very different from the way it did a year ago when I accept this invitation. The decisions being made today in global politics are having real devastating effects here and on the communities in my country. To the violence of right now, we must add was already accumulating a climate emergency that is collapsing life system. This is not an accident, but a result of a particular way of thinking about exploring. This is from with the reality and from a dual position that I wish to speak today. On one hand, as an anthropologist trained in Western approaches, but also a teacher woman who knows that knowledge is also generated in the streets where voices are raised, in courtrooms demanding justice, in the milpa sowing food, in community meetings reaching consensus, in ceremonies around the secret fire. I want to be clear. I am not here to give voice to anyone. Indigenous people have never been silent. With this in mind, I would like to share with you the guiding question of this presentation. Can anthropology, or perhaps the social science broadly, generate itself in painful times? When the lungs of the earth are being destroyed without mercy, when migrant communities are hunted, yet they were burning, when the abuse of power forces has to witness genocides, we seem unable of stopping. What remains for anthropology? Perhaps to return to the wars it has historically started. Not merely to continue analyze them, but to work alongside them, pull up the sky. To address this question, I have organized this reflection around 5 points drawn from the voices of 6 indigenous thinkers of Abdayala. They are not informants, but architects of thoughts. Thinkers who, through their lives and struggle, sustain the community of their people's existence, and with the war in which the world stands today. These 5 arguments together should allow us to imagine a regenerative anthropology, a discipline that aims to extract knowledge and begins to return life, that does not mechanically translate and interpret indigenous life into Western categories, but allows itself to be transformed by other ways of being, that resist from the forest, the river, the valley, language, memory. Allow me to begin with the first point. David Kopenawa, a brother of the Yanomami people, shaman and Amazonian thinker, warned us that the crisis facing any region of the world today is not environmental, cosmic. In his remarkable work, Falling Sky, Words of a Yanomami Shaman, he states, when white people destroy the forest, the sky, yes. If it continues, one day it will fall up all of us, and there will not be refuge. This is not a prophecy into the air. For those, it belongs to the academic study of shamanic myth. It is the science of people who across generations have faced multiple forms of violence imposed by the global economies. A system that in Yanomami territories and many other indigenous lands continues persisted and to extract gold. BBC News report on October 8th of last year that the price of gold reached a historic high of over $4,000 per ounce. By early 2026, according to Reuters, gold exceeded $5,000 per ounce, driven by demand for a safe haven amid global economic and world political insecurity. It was the highest price in 100 years. If global financial elites continue to speculate on this price, it means, in Kopenawa's analysis, that the sky will keep weakening. Because for the global elite, gold is a secure commodity, while for indigenous people, the end of the water and the end of the life. For Kopenawa, the years of hurt and nothing are convinced of twisted way of thinking, incapable of understanding that all living things related to one another. White people only dream of commodities, he says, and their dreams cover the forest with smoke. This commodity thinking not only drives destruction of forests in the Amazon and other indigenous regions, it also shapes the logic of social sciences. Converting them into a gathering of data, the ways of wood are stored, writing articles about others as though amazing works. Yanomami knowledge, according to Kopenawa, operates differently. It is not gathering but receiving in a state of openness. The Shapiri, the spirit of the forest, do not teach those who observe from outside, but those who enter a profound relationship with the forest and allow themselves to be affected by it. Knowledge and trends, learning and surrender become one and the same. The social science, if they wish to remain relevant in the rest of the century, must cultivate what Kopenawa calls cosmic humanity, cosmic humildad. Not merely following the paper trail of the academic validation by acting with purpose. This does not mean imitating rituals or replacing community actors. It means transforming ethical disposition rather than objectifying livelihoods of the discipline must recognize the agency intrinsic to the non-human in rivers, winds, storms, sands. Kopenawa leaves us with an obvious question. Could there exist an anthropology, a social science that does not destroy, distort, or exploit what it gathers, studies, and interprets for the benefit of only one sector? His voice resonates with that of Arlington Krenak, Amazonian indigenous philosopher, whose growth was a river sacred to these people, now dying beneath toxic mining pollution. Did not die as a natural resource, it died as a relative. Both voices sustain the same idea, the destruction of nature, the collapse of kinship. A regenerative anthropology, therefore, cannot limit itself to documenting the collapse. It must act to prevent it. So let's move on Krenak. Arlington Krenak on the Krenak people continues with the second dimension in the line that Copenhagen drew from the forest. In his book, Ideas to Postpone the End of the War, he writes, white humanity believe itself the owner of the earth, and in its arrogance separate the body from the mountain, the soul from the river, the dream from the soul. Now it is incredulous as the war is ending. For Krenak, the end of the world that now terrifies the West is nothing new. Indigenous people already live it 500 years ago. The Spanish and Portuguese inventions brought displacement, slavery, and forced conversion. That was their apocalypse. And yet they survived. We survived. We are experts at postponing the end of the war, he says, with irony. In that survival lies a crucial teaching. Resilience is not passivity. It is the art of living. Following the climate summit held in Belém last year, in the heart of the Amazon, where discussion confirmed that the three hottest years in the planet's history were 2023, 2024, and 2025. Krenak called us to cultivate powerful parachutes, community networks that in the face of the ecocide in which we are already immersed, allow us to sustain the joy of existence. He affirms life does not have to be useful. Trees, rivers, dreams do not exist to serve us. Useless is also sacred. This is a direct critique of the Western paradigm that measures the value of everything, including science, by its productivity. If Copenhagen warns of the sky fall, Krenak asks us to sustain it through song, ritual, and the care of social and ancestral. While we sing, the sky holds, he says, and this must not to be read as a poetic metaphor, but as a part of a living cosmic vision. The conversation between the thinkers is generative. Copenhagen speaks for the spirits that sustain the forest. Krenak speaks for the songs that sustain the sky. Together, they articulate an existential principle. Life is relational and ritual in times of ambition, death, disappearance, genocide, and human depredation. For Krenak, the anthropologist who wishes to regenerate the discipline must accept a modest rule. Since begin, one who explained the war, who champions of the development paradigm, and become incest, someone who cares for it. He says, we do not want to save the planet. We want to keep dancing on it. This simple phrase contains a profound critique of the Western humanism. This is not about saving an abstract world, but about continuing to dance in the concrete world that still sustains us. The Ayuk, Mihi, linguistic and thinker Yasnaya Elena Aguilar Hill joins this conversation with the third dimension by reminding us that the colonial domination over indigenous people and their territories began not only with the sword that pierced bodies and displaced lands, but also with language, with the speech, with the war, with the interpretation of their lives. The state kidnapped the war nation, he says, and made us believe that to exist, one must have an army and a flag. But the language is also a nation. Her argument is clear. The nation of Abdayala to create and recreate themselves depend on linguistic communities that have survived colonial states and the republic, because each language contains a mode of thinking, a philosophical system, and ecology of the soul. Languages do not die, she warns. Languages are killed. Anthropology was born in the midst of that killing, classifying languages as a dialects, culture as an object of study, and people as informants. In the name of the science, is sanctify what Aguilar calls knowledge related one language thinking, or monoliteracy, the assumption that only knowledge writing in colonial languages, Spanish, English, French, is valid. Against this, she demands multiliteracy, recognizing theory produced in Ayuk, Quechua, Yanomami, Xinca, Quiche, or Cachiquel, allowing knowledge to be expressed in its language of origin, not in translation. Every time a language, not only words die, a way of feeling time, space, a kinship is extinguished. Yasnaya arguments connect with Copenhagen and Krenak. When Copenhagen speaks with the Shapir and Krenak converses with the grandfather river, they are doing so in their own languages, within their own spaces, spaces where those relationships are real. For this reason, Yasnaya holds that knowledge related justice begins with linguistic justice. A regenerative anthropology must commit to a profound shift. It is not enough to translate indigenous knowledge. One must think from within indigenous language. This requires returning the world to the languages that still resist, and it implies being changes in educational system and in the international ideologies that continue in a racist fashion to undervalue the languages that refuse to die. The fourth dimension argues that a regenerative anthropology must refuse the idealization of indigenous people and recognize that full liberation is impossible while patriarchal violence continues to reproduce itself within the very territories and bodies of indigenous women. The thinkers Adriana Guzmán Arroyo of the Aymara people and Lorena Caconal of the Xinca and Quechua peoples have profoundly reconfigured the liberation viewpoint for diverse indigenous women across Abdayala. Guzman affirms, community feminism was not born in books, was born in the struggles for women who refused to be silenced while wars were being fought over their bodies and territories. Both thinkers confront us by demonstrating that patriarchy within indigenous families, communities, and people is not exclusively a product of colonial legacy. We must also be open to admit that it existed within the internal structure of indigenous people themselves. Guzmán speaks of the entroncamiento de patriarcados, the interlocking of patriarchies. Colonization did not invent male domination among indigenous women, but rather should be understood as a moment in which the patriarchy of the invader become entangled with existing ancestral forms, creating multiple oppressive systems for women and for those who across history have transgressed the male and female binary. Abnal, for her part, states with clarity, the first territory we must liberate and heal is the body of women. Her concept, the body territory, links patriarchal violence to the persistent resource extraction imposed on indigenous lands. When a female body is when the female body is violated and when a river is destroyed, the same act of displacement is committed. Both thinkers question the romanticized or victimizing lens through which anthropology has often portrayed indigenous communities as harmonious spaces where authorities ensure. Behind this idealization, they argue, lies a silent impulse of the internal violence faced by women and diverse persons who have often been compelled to accept the pedagogy of it. Pedagogía. Guzmán directly challenges the academy. Who are the subjects who write, publish, teach? Why are the bodies of indigenous women the most researched and the less? The dismantling of patriarchy of knowledge requires reconceiving authorship and recognize indigenous women theories. Abnal complement this critique with a spiritual dimension that cannot be ignored, proposing methods of collective healing. We cannot liberate territories if we do not heal the bodies that inhabit them. The healing is not an individual act, but a communal process of political and emotional relief. This indigenous feminist thinker teaches us that there will be no regenerative anthropology without dismantled patriarchy, without bodies that are at peace with themselves, without violence that remains unpunished, without community talent to name themselves without the pain that oppress. The fifth dimension is drawn from the Quechua Aymara thinker, Fausto Reinaga, who wrote in the 1960s that the West has no solutions, it has disease. He said this at a time when speaking of decolonization resembled more a passionate action than a political program. Today, Mother Earth, his words obtain revolutionary force. In his landmark work, Revolución India, Reinaga declared, the revolution of India is not part of the war revolution. It is the war revolution itself. He was not seeking the inclusion of indigenous people within the colonial state, but rather its dismantle and the construction of another civilization founded on mutual giving and respect for life. This argument is directly relevant today in Guatemala, my territory, especially in the highlands, where Luis Pacheco and Héctor Chaclán, member of the 48 cantones de Totonicapán, have spent 11 months in arbitrary detention, accused of terrorism for demanding that the electoral results of 2023 be respected. With this argument, Reinaga sought not the integration of indigenous people into the state, but rather the destruction of the colonial state and the creation of another civilization that would end the persecution of indigenous people. His proposal, el pensamiento amautico, amautic thought, derived from the Amautas and the Andean elders, integrate reason, intuition, body, and cosmos, and stand in contrast with European philosophy that separate subject from object. For the Amawata, all knowledge arises from relationship. To think, Reinaga would say, is to feel with the universe. Reinaga's ideas resonate with those of Copenhagen and Krenak, all the three denounced from different historical moments and territorial contexts, the collapse of civilization in the East. The first, those from the Amazonian forest, the second from the Tose River, and the third from the Andean mountains, all agree that it is not enough to reform anthropology. It must be refunded from not privileged spaces, far from where very few wish to go, and even less are willing to demand. Reinaga reminds us that the social sciences were born as a colonial project. Hence, his claim that the anthropologist is the knowledge-related enemy, related enemy of the Indian. And yet, he left one possibility. If anthropology places itself in the service of liberation rather than of the archive, it can be transformed. In 2026, his call to Indian revolution is not a nostalgia, it is a necessity in dialogue with the previous voices. This revolution is not only political, it is also spiritual and ecological, internal and non-excluding. It is the coming together for all the dimensions presented, from Copenhagen, falling sky, the Krenak's song, Yasnaya's living language, to Carnal and Guzman's varied territories. All this foreign flow together. Regenerar vida to fall up sky. From the guardians of territories, languages, bodies, and memories emerge a shared. The regeneration of anthropology will not be possible without the regeneration of life itself. Copenhagen, Krenak, Aguilar Hill, Guzman, Sabinal, and Reinaga converge on one truth, that indigenous people know and live. Knowledge is not produced in separation, but in relationship. For them, thinking is not an individual act, it's an act of each. The commodity thinking that Copenhagen denounced is the same logic that Krenak identified in the tyranny of utility over the sustained us, but teach that no science is possible in a civilization that dismisses all the value that it cannot measure. Yasnaya Aguilar remind us, while the world smashes before our eyes, or it can commit to discussing alternative as a regenerative practice woven from the filaments that people have never lived. For this, it is not enough to cite indigenous thinkers, as I have done here. I'm clear that the challenges does not exempt me. It includes me. How much of my mother languages have I lost? How many collective causes have I left behind? Above all, I believe we must learn from them in the realm of ethics, not only in the realm of theory. To learn that research without mutual givings and without co-authorship is static. That neutrality in the face of injustice and genocide unfolding before our eye is complicity. That knowledge without bonds to diverse lives become empty. And that wars without roots end up serving the very power they claim. We need to understand that one severe claim crisis, extreme inequality, wealth accumulation, patriarchal violence, discrimination on the basis of origin, skin color, or accent, and the loss of indigenous language are all symptoms of the same disease, the arrogance of civilization. And it is precisely that arrogance that anthropology is called up to dismantle from within. As Krenak reminds us, we are not observers of the end of the world. We are part of the end of the world. And it is in that it is in that realization that our responsibility lies. A regenerative anthropology will not be a discipline. It will be a responsibility of community to stand with people who defend their lives, their children, their elders, their rivers, and the mountains, to support the healing process of violated by men and by other women, to sustain the rebirth languages that still resist, to help rebuild a sense of community and civilization, to struggle without deleting, without appropriating, without speaking for others. That is the teaching that Copenhagen and And I'm sorry. Problem. Okay. That is the when the language of the herd were being routed, when the world was separate from the seed, Usman and Cabnal show that this break also affected the bodies of indigenous women, converting them into territories of. And Reinawa warns us that it will not be enough to reform. Dismantle among these things that runs a silent, powerful conscience, the conviction that the life is not human. Their voices arising from distinct geographies, places, research. A regenerative anthropology does not seek to represent the other, but to repair relationship among all, including those not considered subject by Western theory of the knowledge, but who, for ancestral peoples, have never ceased to be so. If in the 20th century anthropologists task was to describe the world, in the 21st century it must be willing to sustain it, not as one who dominates, but as one who shares the task on equal terms. Holding the sky, as Yanomami sibling says, is not a symbolic movement. It is a life commitment. The sky is not held up with theories. It is held up with network, with work that exhausts, and that perhaps is the greatest legacy that indigenous people offer humanity today. A theory of knowledge, of care, a science of mutual giving, a politics of affection, and of the defense of the search for liberation in the midst of so much. In conclusion, whether we accept it or not, we stand at a point of crossroads. Anthropology can continue to be mirrored in which the Western contemplates and congratulates its own discoveries. Yasnaya, Guzman, Cabnal, and Reinaga leave us. Knowledge is in relation, and only those who recognize their mutual dependence can hold up. The regeneration of anthropology will not come from with its own walls. It will not emerge from a new theoretical framework, a new curriculum, or a new inclusive citation practice. Through all these matters are important, but it will come, if it comes at all, from the decision to place the discipline in a relationship with the people it has historically studied, and too often silenced. Schopenhauer teaches us that knowledge is not accumulated. It is received in a state of openness through a relationship with the living. Krenak teaches us that to sustain life is not a metaphor. It is a daily communal act of song, memory, and care. Yasnaya reminds us that language is not a tool of communication. It is an entire world, and when it dies, a way of feeling, time, and kinship is lost as well. Guzman and Capnal show us that no territory can be free while the bodies of women remain seats of conquest. And Reinaga tells us that the reform is not enough. Together, these voices do not offer anthropology a correction. They offer it a path for knowledge that does not extract but returns, for research that not represent but repairs, a science that does not stand above or its study, but accept its place within it, responsible, accountable, and in relation. To regenerate anthropology from indigenous people means, above all, to learn what they have never stopped practicing, that knowledge is a form of care, that singing is a form of kinship, and that form of this time not be born of only one discipline. It's the work of all of us together in this broken and still living world. Muchas gracias.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about how you navigate your position, like in the academic world. Well, bringing all this knowledge, but also the tensions to be asked by the programs that are in the academic world to produce, and like how do you like any movement in all your years to create more space for the type of knowledge production that you want? Inspiring us to do. Sí, tiene sentido lo que digo.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And thank you for your question. This is a challenge, a great challenge, but also is a form of life. You know, I remember when I was in the elementary school in my country, and I learned in my classes that the responsible for the very, very problems of the old problems of my country were the indigenous people. Also, I learned in my classes that the indigenous people are drunks, are very lazy people. They only serve for hard work, but they not for think, not for create. And this line, try to dismantle this line in my country is not easy. This is only a very small example, but it's the same in the academia. The academia, you can translate the same example to the academia. The academia has incredible spaces, and I think we need to keep those spaces. We need to maintain those spaces, especially now, this moment, where we will have a lot of competition in different parts of the world. You know, I remember that when I came here, for me were very important many of my classes. Not all, but many of my classes. I learned here in United States about racial oppression, racism, about different kind of feminism. So my position is the academia per se try to maintain privileges from some elites. But also the academia has small spaces, and we try to maintain those spaces. Not easy, it's very hard, but it's possible. For me, the challenge is how I can use, or what is the best way to use my privilege or this struggle. Always I ask this question for myself. And I think this question is for everyone, so even the academia. The academia is important, but the struggle in the street, the struggle in the communities, more important. We think only in the Amazonia. The Amazonia is incredible devastation now. What we are doing. The Amazonia is not only dangerous for indigenous people, it's dangerous for all. So this is my point, using my experience. Another thing that I want to say is in the academia, the people think that the indigenous sabios, they don't have nothing to say. We always use another, special Western thinkers, but not indigenous people. So in this paper, I try to bring you the voices of indigenous thinkers.
Yes. Building up on the previous question, what advice would you give to students who want to practice regenerative anthropology in their own work? And what frameworks would adopt or like their own work?
Could you repeat your question, please? I can hear.
What advice would you give students who want to practice regenerative anthropology in their own work?
Right. Thank you so much. You know, academia is important. But my recommendation is to buy a backpack and go to the places, live with the people, learn the languages, understand the problems. Are the same problems that you are confronting here, but with less tools. The people survive there. The people sustain this guy, and it is a great metaphor. You know, the people produce food there. No rights, no political spaces. Again, I want to talk about my country. We are around 50% of the population in Guatemala. We have 23 different indigenous languages, 25 if we add Xinca and Garifuna. But we don't have the same political power in my country, you know? So my recommendation is, if you want to understand why indigenous people in Guatemala only have only one indigenous woman has one seat in the Congress. Why? You need to go there and to understand the racial relationship behind the state. And I want to say another thing. The majority of the white elites from Latin America hear more you than us. And this is part of the racism. If you have more possibilities to publish about all this disposition, about all this discrimination and racism, you will support the indigenous struggles. So my recommendation is go to this territory. And anthropology is the best. We are training for field works.
Thank you for a very beautiful talk and very inspiring. I think a little later, I'd appreciate if you'd write down the names of the indigenous speakers and references so I can see them. Just a little bit. I've worked for 45 years on and off in South Sudan. So I hear tremendous what you're doing. I'm now retired from the university, and I started a company last year to introduce more resources in the indigenous languages of the people of South Sudan. And it's a whole different world, and I'm doing okay. But some basic things I think anthropologists and especially linguists can do. I've been introduced to some of the linguistic people who are working in the area, and there's nothing practical about it. I mean, they could produce more resources, dictionaries, things that are really helpful to people. And for anthropologists, I think there's absolutely no excuse at this point where anybody who's worked in an area, I know the languages. I mean, I learned Arabic and Nuer, but other people can translate at least what they've written into something in the indigenous languages, so there's start communication there, as well as bringing in that resource. It's just a suggestion. I think at this point, it's inexcusable that anthropologists can go and just write and study, and they publish only in other languages, and not and not even give back a dialogue. So that's my suggestion for students in the future. There's no excuse as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to leave my presentation to the center, and you can send a copy to the professor, and you can read the names and the books of the authors. I agree. I totally agree with you. We have a lot of examples in Guatemala from social science in general, where the PhD candidates work there, and when they obtain their PhD, they never return what they extract from the communities. And now they have here an incredible, position, and they never return. Also, I'm talking about youth academics, not only all academics. I'm talking about historian, anthropologists, linguistic. So this is again the same and the same. And also I think the anthropology department need to review all these bad practices.
I think there should be some ethical guideline. I mean, at this point, my point is, it's just inexcusable in my mind, because you can't have a conversation with the communities there unless you check things out and produce it in their language and get something back. So ethically, I think anthropology is a simple thing. It should be there now.
I agree with you. Thank you.
Sivalach Maltiosh, Anika Lenubik in Tijoshel al University de Wisconsin, Quintijo Huip, Lequiche, Zichpak, Quetzaltenango. También. I said, my name is Anika Rice. I'm a student here, a PhD student, and I work in Guatemala. And I've learned some of Maya Quiche, Irma Alicia's language in Quetzaltenango before and during doing field work there. And my question is specifically following the question that was just asked about going back to communities and sharing research with communities, which I'm in the process of figuring out how to do and working with partner organizations and a lot of the women who I've worked with in Santa Maria Chiquimula, Totonicapan. And a lot of the women I work with don't read and write because of barriers to access and education. And I'm trying to think of creative ways to bring that information back to the communities. Besides, of course, some written reports for partner NGOs and stuff like that. The written reports won't, while I will give people copies, they might not mean so much to people who don't read and write in a certain way. And so some of the things I'm thinking about are like a photo exhibit where women can present their narratives, other types of workshops. And I'm just wondering of examples that you've seen that work in those contexts, because I try to think creatively and I'm asking people in my partner communities, but wanted to hear your thoughts on that as well. And I look forward to talking more.
I know it's very hard because the majority of indigenous women in Guatemala, the literate is very, very high, In some communities, 90%, 80% of the total of the population. So it's very difficult. My mother was illiterate also. And I remember this was not easy for me how to share the work that I want to do. For my mother, my work always was a dangerous. For my mother, my publication in the newspaper in Guatemala as a very public, for her it was dangerous. So I understand, but now there is women like Lola Capnal, for example, and other indigenous women who work and live with communities, and they try to empower indigenous women through spirituality, through healing, through a different process, in their own language, using what they have it in the community, share the food, share the problems, try to find some resolution for the greatest problem that they confront. So it's not difficult, but also another recommendation for me is keep the relationship with the communities. Keep the relationship not to be only for 2 or 3 years. Keep working with them for the rest of your life. This is not a marriage, but more or less is a relationship for the rest of the life. Because I have another example that I want to share with you is the trial against Rios Montt, for example. In this moment, it was in 2013. I remember that some group of people from the United States, from different universities, support the survivor of genocide in Guatemala as expert witness, as acompañantes, accompanying in different way. It was a good example of how the academia is useful in a specific moment. It was a historic moment. Indigenous people, we never forgot about this trial, and also we never forgot the people who support the survivor in this moment. The research were very useful for the community. So not everything is bad, We have some good examples, but I think we have to be critics permanently. Essentially. Anyone else?
I think you said a little bit about this, but do you have any more examples of projects or research projects that are good examples of this regenerative anthropology that have happened in the past?
In Guatemala, we have more examples, especially after the peace agreement was signed in 1996 in the transitional justice. We had a lot of trials and other anthropologists, historians, linguistic professionals work as expert witness. I think it was very useful, the support in this moment. But I try to think about it. Another example is the Red contra Racismo.
The network that's racist.
The racism in Latin America. This project were among community leaders, indigenous women, Black women from Brazil, from Colombia, from Honduras, indigenous women from Guatemala, from South Mexico, from professors from the United States. And we worked during 10 years, tried to put in the table, in the national table, the racism, how the racism impact in the life of indigenous. For me, it was another example, and I think there is some other, but probably now we are in a very, I don't know, very fresh moment. So I think those topics is important to discuss.
Hi, thank you very much. I've got a much better understanding of, I think you did a good job of defining the problem that anthropology is having. My question is, see if I can still remember it. Is there, I'm not an anthropologist, so is there within the Anthropology Academy in the West, is there a systematic examination of the damage that anthropology scholarship has done or been used for ill by the West against the populations, cultures that they study? I guess it's a question not just for you, but I guess any anthropologist in the room. I'm curious about how the academy deals with the damage that they may do have done over the centuries. Sounds like not much reflection has happened.
We'll let that silence speak for itself, I think. I don't have a question either, Irma, but what did strike me, well, that I second Lola, this was so beautiful, and I can't wait to read your remarks again. But what really struck me is the notion that life is relational. And all I could think about in immediate reaction was so is power. Power is also relational. And I'm curious how you as an anthropologist approach that and approach this question of power and life in this moment, not only within the academy and the work that you're doing, but also in this call to make our world better, to heal our world. Like there is a question, to me anyway, of power. And I'm curious how you see that and as an anthropologist, as an activist, as an Indigenous woman.
Okay. Power is part of you can find power in every community also, not only in the academia. And also you can find power using against others. And I try to think what is the best translation in Quiche about the power, But what the thinkers said about power, they are talking also about the power of the academia, or the power that the academia has to name, to publish in the name of others. This is a very power. I don't know, but the majority of the people never have been read about those authors that I share with you today, because they don't have the same power, The power is in Stanford, is in Harvard, is in other spaces, is in UN, is in other institutions, in Congress, the power is there, So I think we need when we work as a not only as anthropologists, as academics, we need to recognize that we have power. And the challenge is how to use this power, Now we turn on the news and we are well, I don't have the word in español, in English. We presenciando, ¿no? Somos testigos. We testify how this
Witness.
political power is using against the rest of the world. So power is a very complex privilege. Thanks. As academics in Guatemala, there are very few academics, Indigenous academics in Guatemala. We always ask about we have some power, probably small, and how we want to use this power that we have.
I have something to add, prompted by your question, sir, in the front row. I'm also not an anthropologist, but I work in African art and study histories of collecting, which means I study histories of anthropology. And what I think is interesting when you asked that question, I immediately thought it's almost in fashion now for anthropologists, especially based in Europe, to go through collections, especially of photos and archives, but also of objects. Take these photos and archives to the communities from which they were taken over 100 years ago, put together installations and exhibitions. So I was thinking of your question, and then write about it. I feel like when I go to conferences in Europe, like every panel I go to is talking about these initiatives. And I don't think it's necessarily framed in an idea of repair, but or an idea of kind of atoning, but you can tell that it is anthropologists grappling with these physical legacies of anthropology in European collections that are physically separate and very hard for people from the descendant communities to access. And then it's sometimes kind of sad to think it's just one by one person, one grad student going back to specific communities to try create new knowledge and share knowledge. So I can think of a few examples like that, which might answer your question.
Well, co-authorship, I think co-authorship is part of what you are talking about. Now we are published in the individual, as an individual, as a professor, as a researcher from this center, from this university. But I think we need to start to publish in co-authorship with those communities, because the knowledge from those communities, it will be one of the very small reparation, the co-authorship. It's not easy, it's very hard. Why? Because the ego in the academia is is strong, and we need a lot of books for the position in my university and for the next department that I wanna run, etc. We know this schema. So it's hard sometimes. I try about when you talk about the photos. I know your experience. And I know what is the best way. I think we need to work with the communities and ask them, what is the way, I can talk about from my community, but this is only one community, Latin America, around the world, there is more than 5,000 indigenous groups around the world. So when you talk about all the problems that is the legacy in anthropology, we need to talk about all these 5,000 problems, And I think also the anthropology need to work here. Use the anthropology for this country also,
You mean I'm back on ourselves?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. One question is why we are in the middle of this war. This question, so we need to find those questions inside. And the anthropology is useful for work with people, for us to. Por favor.
In the face of the challenges that you outlined today, I'm curious if you could share a little bit about how you keep your energy up, or what gives you hope to keep going.
Thank you. My dream when I was a child was to enter a university. This was my dream. And in this moment in Guatemala, it was impossible because the majority of the indigenous people were illiterate and poor. I came from a mid-class indigenous family. So my father supported me to work for my dream. And when I had the opportunity to finish my university in Guatemala City, I remember that it was in the middle of the Civil War. So I saw how the army killed my professors, my classmates. I lost incredible professor, friends. When I finished my school, I tried to came here, not United States, but my objective was to go outside Guatemala and try to learn some methodologies, other forms of thinking, and to return to Guatemala and use for indigenous struggle. And I learned many things here. I returned to my country. And when I returned to my country, I found that the majority of indigenous people were survivors of genocide. And the majority of them, when we finished the meetings, they asked me, compañera, there is possible to receive support in order to find my brother, my husband, my sister. I need to find them. So I learned that all the resources that were useful for my life, I need to use these resources for them. But when I work in these devastated communities, the painful was very, very hard. I hear many testimonies of survivors, many testimonies of indigenous women who confront sexual violence in different moments in Guatemala. And I work as an expert witness. I use my PhD for them, for present in front of the tribunal all those stories that I heard. But in some moments, I felt a lot of, I was hungry with my country. I was hungry with the army, and my question was that I need to find some equilibrium. I need to find some alegría, some dream. And for me, the best way was to write poetry and to share the poetry with the survivors. It's easy to be drunker, to use drugs in a space like that, So it's part of my experience to share with them my work and to find through them the possibility to continue working and living. So for me, mi fuerza is my community. The women, the men who work, who support all the injustice in my country and in other countries.